Welcome back to Comics Are Awesome, where we bring you everything awesome in comics. It's been a while, so let's wax nostalgic.
We as geeky nerd types tend to like labels. It makes things easier. We can talk about something that's actually a broad topic with just a few words. For example, we love our ages. Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze, etc., etc. Now, I've had minor concerns with the idea of these ages, as they really are a broad generalization. DC's Silver Age doesn't really resemble Marvel's that much. And really, once you get past the Bronze Age, everything becomes a bit nebulous. Is the next period called the Iron Age or the Dark Age? What are today's comics called? Plus, by going gold, silver, bronze, it kind of implies the value of those eras. And I've read a few Golden Age books, and trust me, not everything that glitters is gold.
But nitpicky rants aside, let's take a look at one of the greatest tributes to the Silver Age ever, with DC's The New Frontier. Written and drawn in 2004, this is one of my favorite examples of a deconstructionist comic.
Deconstructionism in comics got really popular and largely misunderstood around the time when Alan Moore used it to analyze superheroes in Watchmen. When trying to figure out why a person would wear a costume and take on dangerous criminals, he came to the not entirely irrational conclusion that they would likely be insane or get off on it in some way. But that's not what Cook and New Frontier tries to accomplish. Most of the book is set in the late 50s, just before the start of the Silver Age. Most of the Golden Age heroes have retired after they refused to give up their identities to the House of Un-American Activities Committee, the exceptions being Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman.
Which, after the Golden Age, were the only three superheroes who had their own titles still. I see what you're doing here, comic.
Likewise, the character's timeline in The New Frontier more or less lines up with their debut in comics. The Flash gets his powers in 1956, the same year as Showcase number 4 was published. Green Lantern in 1959 matches up with Showcase number 22, etc., etc. While there are changes, it helps root the fact that the book isn't just another superhero yarn, it's a period story.
Darwyn Cooke's love for this era shines through the material. He's not just doing a tribute to the comics of the time, but rather to the era as a whole.
Not just the superheroes either. We get sci-fi characters like Adam Strange, the ace pilots known as the Blackhawk, and the original government troubleshooters known as the Suicide Squad. The cast here is simply huge. While the book follows a bunch of different characters, including the Flash, Martian Manhunter, the Challengers of the Unknown, and more, if there's one that tends to get more attention than the others, I'd say it'd have to be Hal Jordan. And note I said Hal, not Green Lantern. While Hal does eventually get his ring here, due to the fact that the story takes place over years, and the fact that he was one of the last Silver Age heroes created before the Justice League of America premiered, he spends most of his time as a civilian. And why shouldn't Hal be the focus? He was a test pilot in the era of Chuck Yeager and Project Mercury, who got a magic ring to take him into space. He's the perfect focus to explore America of the time. Brave, heroic, but imperfect, and plagued by what he sees as moral failing when he had to kill in self-defense, just moments after the Korean War came to a ceasefire. And while he gets most of the attention and build-up, he's not the only one who represents America of the time. Wonder Woman, who fought for America since World War II, gets told by Eisenhower that her radical opinions aren't needed. Not that different from the women who had to keep their country running a decade before while the men fought in the front lines, and then were expected to return to being housewives. Flash, who wears red, gets attacked by the government agents because he's seen as uncontrollable and dangerous, much like how many feared the communist threat. John Jones, the Martian Manhunter, is an alien who can pass for normal, but has to live a closeted lifestyle for fear that people would turn on him as well. And then there's John Henry.
Except for the green alien, who can choose to look Caucasian if he wants to, you might notice that this book so far has featured, well, a whole lot of honkies.
To put it bluntly, comics of the era were aimed at a white audience. And to be honest, it's probably for the best anyways. The comic writers of the era weren't exactly a bastion of political correctness, as Green Lantern's Inuit mechanic friend Tom Pie-Face Kalmuku can attest. But still, Cook is able to work in one new character into the story to show what a minority of that time might have to face. Meet John Henry, an African-American man who was hung by Klansmen and survived by a twisted miracle but lost his family. He puts on a black hood to mirror their white ones, and still wearing his noose, armed with only a hammer, he fights against those that killed his loved ones. John Henry clearly draws inspiration from both the classic figure from folklore and the DC character of Steel. His story is one of the shortest of the main characters, and it only barely intersects with the main plot, but it's also the most haunting. While neither I nor I imagine most of my viewers were alive during this period, it's still not so far removed in time to prevent sending a chill down your spine.
Shortly after I originally wrote my first draft of this review, there was a shooting in Overland Park, Kansas, at the Jewish Community Center, about 10 minutes from where I live. 2 people were killed. I don't know them. They weren't even Jewish. But they were shot and killed by a member of the KKK the day before Passover. This book, it may be set 50 years ago, but I guarantee you, it's still relevant today.
And that's why I call this a deconstructionist story. It doesn't break down the characters so much as the era that they took place in. The comics at the time literally couldn't talk about these things. The Comics Code prevented them from releasing comics where any source of authority is questioned. New Frontier, however, shines a light on the world that surrounded the time of these heroes, and shows it to you, warts and all. But it doesn't just focus on the negative. We accomplished amazing things during this era: space travel, open discussion of civil rights, and more. Great and wonderful things that pushed us forward as a society. And that's what these heroes represent, more than anything, that outside of the fear-mongering, we are capable of amazing feats. We can come together in the time of need and offer hope. We can be fearless when we need to, and we can put away our differences and work together for a greater good. If I have one complaint about this book, the ultimate threat and where the plot all comes together is a bit Lovecraftian, and therefore comes across a bit impersonal. Most of the plot is just a retelling of the origins of these characters, but provides them with a loose connective tissue while the villain and its followers act in the background. There's no face to the villain, and while there is a physical representation, but after all the build-up, when we get to it, it's just a tad disappointing.
Minor complaints aside though, this book is close to perfect. At least as much as a book of this style can be.
Because this is a limited series, I wanted to keep this review a bit short, but I could easily ramble on much longer about all the little details. From the spectacular opening featuring the World War II military heroes, the Losers, to the little Easter eggs, to just experiencing the era from the perspective of someone whose passion rings clear. You can get DC New Frontier in 2 trade paperbacks, but if you want to splurge or find a good sale, I recommend you pick up the Absolute Collection, if for no other reason than the larger size pages really allows you to appreciate Cook's art. It's got a clean style that reminds me a lot of Bruce Timm's art that was the basis for many of the various DC animated series, but it's also got a lot more detailed bits at the same time. Yeah, I just said it was simple and detailed. What are you going to do about it? Speaking of animated, Tim and Company adapted New Frontier, renamed Justice League: The New Frontier, as one of their earliest direct-to-video animated movie releases. It's okay. It has some great casting, with David Boreanaz as Hal Jordan, Neil Patrick Harris as Barry Allen, and Lucy Lawless as Wonder Woman. And the art really does a great job of capturing Cook's art, but it cuts down or completely cuts out most of the non-Justice League characters. John Henry basically gets a single mention. Not that I was surprised that Warner Brothers was reluctant to release a PG-13 cartoon with the KKK lynching people, and a black man getting his violent revenge. At the time, this film was one of the better direct-to-video DC releases, but since then, they've done better. It's still worth a watch, just don't expect them to translate 400 pages of graphic novel into a 75-minute cartoon and get everything in it.
Just because we can look at any era and say, this wasn't as perfect or as noble as we like to pretend it was, doesn't mean that it's without merit. There's a place for heroes in any era, and that's why I absolutely adore DC The New Frontier. I highly recommend you go seek it out, and let me know what you think in a comment below. And until next time, remember, comics are awesome, and we're going to continue to get the word out.
Some would say that those struggles are all over, that all the horizons have been explored, that all the battles have been won, that there is no longer an American frontier. And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of unknown opportunities and perils. Beyond that frontier are uncharted areas of science and space, unsolved problems of peace and war, unconquered province of ignorance and prejudice. I'm asking each of you to be pioneers towards that new frontier. All mankind waits upon our decision. A whole world looks to see what we shall do. And we cannot fail that trust, and we cannot fail to try.
Well, it's okay. But real men wear pants.